thy soul shall find itself alone, mid dark thoughts of the gray tombstone. Not one of all the crowd to pry into thine hour of secrecy.
Hello and welcome to the Outcry Theatre Podcast. This is Jason Johnson-Spinos, filling in for our regular host, Becca Johnson-Spinos. Today we're delving into the madness of Edgar Allan Poe, Outcry's new adaptation of the works of the classic author and poet. Hello, I'm here with the two actresses playing Edgar Allan Poe in The Madness of Edgar Allan Poe. Do you guys want to introduce yourselves?
Hi, I'm Giulia Garbani.
And I'm Alex Gray.
Can you guys talk a little bit about The Madness of Edgar Allan Poe?
Well, the show opens with Poe being by himself in his snug little cottage, and you see him in such a vulnerable place. Like, he's at the end of his life. His life hasn't even really been a life. It's just him dying really, really slowly in reality, and he's just a total mess. And you just watch him see his stories come to life, and you're there with him, and you see his life move like in front of him, I guess, and you see people from his past, you see him when he was younger, and it's just really interesting when you see him and his stories together and you see how related to him they really are.
In the show, he goes back through his memories and the people in his life that he's interacted with, and we get to see like how he became the way that he is. We get to go through a lot of his different stories, like the Black Cat, the Fall of the House of Usher, the Mask of the Red Death, the System of Dr. Tarn, Professor Feather, the Telltale Heart, and the Raven.
So as you guys said, Poe in this version is nearing death. He's really sick, and he's had a really tough life. He's lost basically everybody he's ever loved, and he's just in a really tough emotional place. Obviously, as teenagers, you are not in that place in any way. So I imagine there was some challenges with taking on that part. How did you relate to the character and approach the role?
I feel like the driving force of the show is that he can't really seem to let go of the past. And that's like what takes him back through everything and what brings all of his stories and characters and memories and lost ones to life. And I think that just humanity as a whole, we all really struggle with letting go of things and learning to move on, even though it's definitely not at the same level that he's had to deal with. Like, I just try to bring in, like, when I've tried to really cling to something and not let someone go and bring that desperation into it.
Yeah, one thing that helped me try to get into his state of mind, sort of, was just any emotional baggage that I've gotten rid of, we're bringing that back and we're going to remember it, because one thing that's so difficult with being Poe is getting into his state of mind, and I don't even think I really can, because he's just gone through so much in his life. He dealt with so much when he was younger than me, he dealt with so much when he was my age, and he dealt with so much when he was older. So it's really hard to even conceive how much grief and sadness he had to deal with at such a young age. And it's just interesting to try and, I guess, get into his state of mind.
In this production, Edgar Allan Poe never leaves stage. He's on stage for the entire play, watching his different stories come to life in front of him. What's that been like?
I mean, the hard things about it is that, like, you don't have a time to, like, break. You always have to stay into it, even when you're just, like, chilling in the background watching the stories go on. Like, you still have to be engaged and involved. It's not just you watching the show. It's like, how would he be viewing these characters and viewing the story? And then on a more, like, technical aspect, it's just, like, you always have to be in it. You have to really know your stuff, because you don't have time to, like, huddle backstage in a corner and review it. Like, if you forget your props or you forget one of your lines, you're, like, pretty screwed. But it's also really cool because you get to watch the whole thing come together. And since you don't get to snap out of it, it's like so fulfilling because you know that you'll get to be there the whole time and watch all that happens and just stay in that mindset for the entire show until it's over and just completely ride that wave until it's down. And that's really cool.
One good thing about it is you really can't break character. Like if you go backstage, you have a tendency to just kind of snap out of it for a hot second and then you get right back into it. But with Poe, you're just sitting there the entire time. And when he does stand up and interact with characters, that's kind of, oh, right, reminding the audience that he's there. And it's just like, oh, hello, like handing Basil an axe or handing this person a drink or opening the door for this person. And like Alex said, yes, you are definitely screwed if you forget a line or if something's not where it's supposed to be, because you can't just run backstage and get it, and you don't have any time to break, don't have any time to get water, and the only thing we're going to drink is sweet tea for like 2 hours, which is going to be great. But I just think it's interesting because I bet every once in a while I can imagine if when I'm in the audience watching Alex, or if I was just in the audience and not involved with the show, my eyes would occasionally drift over and see what Poe was doing and just seeing how he's reacting to all of this unfolding in front of him. So Poe just chilling in the background is a pretty interesting aspect of the show.
To kind of add on to that, the sweet tea that they're drinking, while it is obviously going to be tea for the actresses, is supposed to be brandy for Poe, since Poe had a bit of an alcohol issue. Do you guys want to talk a little bit about that?
If your eyes do occasionally drift off to Poe during the show, you are going to notice that bottle of brandy getting smaller and smaller and smaller as the show continues, because at least what I like imagine me doing, especially during like tech and the show, is that I'm going to be drinking more and more as the show goes on, and that bottle is going to get less full faster and faster. And just like, he had a serious problem with alcohol, and we're really going to try and incorporate that and display that to the audience, and just sweet tea.
Once, upon a midnight dreary, while I pondered, weak and weary, over many a quaint and curious volume of forgotten lore, while I nodded, nearly napping, suddenly there came a tapping, as if someone gently rapping at my chamber door. "'Tis some visitor," I muttered, tapping at my chamber door. Only this, and nothing more.
Probably the biggest thing that you guys do during the show is that you perform the Raven all by yourself, doing the entire poem straight through, which is about a 10-minute sequence of you guys just talking alone. What's that like? And what have been the challenges with that poem?
Well, I mean, the short answer is that it's hard, because that's definitely like a lengthy one, and it's just us up there. So like, it's scary because you're scared you're gonna forget what you're supposed to be doing. But like, once you memorize it, it's hard because you go through such an emotional roller coaster in it. Like, you go from being like pretty chill, you know, you're just chilling, reading your books, and then you get like all paranoid, but you're trying to deny the fact that you're scared, and then you just get normal scared, and then you're angry and you're terrified and you're desperate and you're just yelling up there and like almost crying, and it's just hard to not, you can't snap out of it. You don't get a chance to snap out of it. The only way that's gonna like read how it's supposed to is if you just stay in it the entire time and just completely give yourself to it. And that's really hard to do, especially when you're trying to think about all the lines and blocking that you're supposed to be doing. Also, since it's just such an iconic poem, like you think Poe and you're like, oh yeah, haha, quoth the Raven. There's a lot of pressure to really do it justice since it's so well known. If you mess up a bit, people might know.
Yeah, it definitely is an emotional roller coaster. And one thing, especially when we first did it in rehearsal and then again in off book, was I was kind of nervous about being so unhinged at some points of that poem, because especially towards the end, and since it's at the end of the show, Poe's already gone completely crazy, and you just have to let yourself go, and just you yell and you might cry, I guess, but it's just so emotional and raw, and the only person that's going to be on stage with you is Samantha or Shay holding this puppet raven, and you're just going to be so angry at it and so emotional towards it. And it is and was very difficult to memorize it and get off book and just remember everything that you're supposed to do, because it's a lot, and it's a long time to be on stage basically by yourself, and it's so much to remember. But I can imagine that once we get to shows and we run it in tech and it goes however it's going to go, it'll be a really fulfilling experience to just see it all come together.
Which of the several stories that we do of Edgar Allan Poe's oeuvre is your favorite of this play?
My favorite would either be The Fall of the House of Usher or The Telltale Heart. The Fall of the House of Usher, like reading it, there's just so much descriptions and sensory language. Like it's written in such a way that you really feel like you're there. And most of the other ones are like in your face horrifying. Like it's like, oh, we're gonna murder a guy. But Fall of the House of Usher, I feel like is a lot more subtly horrifying. Like their ties to the house. It's a lot more just like undertones of creepiness and like watching someone slowly go insane and absolutely lose it. And I think that's really cool. And then Telltale Heart is like the opposite, because in all the other stories, they're all very like afraid kind of their insanity. And then Telltale Heart, like Hastings kind of owns the fact that she's insane. Like she's like, yeah, I've killed a guy, but I did it so well. Like I was an expert at that. And it's so entertaining to watch someone just be totally confident and proud of the fact that they murdered this guy so expertly.
Well, before we even started doing Poe, and before Mr. J even announced that we were going to do Poe, I was always a bit of a fan of his writing, and one of my favorite stories was The Black Cat. And I really couldn't think of a particular reason why I like it so much, but to me it's just really pleasing to read. Like, Basil's just an interesting character in a weird, twisted, he's insane, please don't sort of way. And just the whole thing with the cat in general, it's just really symbolic. And after doing Poe, you see how much it really ties into his life and how many like things are related to things he's gone through. And after Poe, I think another one of my favorites was Mask of the Red Death, because doing it is really fun. I feel like this is the one story besides Raven that Poe is very much involved. It's just really fun to do on stage, and the whole moral, I guess, and theme of the story is really interesting to me, of no matter who you are or what you have, or how much money you have, you can't escape real life. It's just a very interesting and fun story to do.
Why should people come see The Madness of Edgar Allan Poe?
I feel like it's a very fresh take on like stories that most people, even if they don't know all the individual stories, like you can't grow up without hearing about Edgar Allan Poe and like knowing that he's like king of the emos, you know, hearing about the stuff about his life and at least hearing or reading one of his stories or poems in school. But I think this show is really cool because it shows you the connection between the stories and his life so well, and like the order of the stories and the way that they all flow into each other feel very purposeful. They feel like everything in the show has a reason and all flows together and they all cause each other, and like you really get to see him grow more vulnerable and close to death and desperate, and you get to see how all the things in his life affected him and how he like used his stories to escape that and how he used his stories to channel that, and like the complete interconnectedness between him and his writings.
First of all, it's spooky and it's October, which means it's the perfect way to get into the spooky spirit. But it's not just spooky, but I feel like it's a show that picks you apart while you're watching it. Like, every individual story kind of attacks a certain demographic, I guess. And also, it's a great way to really get to know Poe because, like Alex said, nobody really grows up without hearing the name Edgar Allan Poe, but a lot of people don't really get to know him. And I feel like this show is a really deep and personal dive into his world and his writing and his life and his problems and just his brain. So it's like this show is picking apart at you, but you're picking apart at Poe and everybody else. And it's just so cool and fulfilling to watch. And I hope you cry. That's my one hope.
Thank you guys so much for talking with me.
Thanks for
so much
having
for
me.
having us.
The Madness of Edgar Allan Poe runs October 18th through the 27th at the Addison Theater Center Studio Theater. Tickets are on sale now on the Outcry Theater website. Thank you so much for joining us for this episode of the Outcry Theatre Podcast. This podcast has been produced and edited by me, Jason Johnson-Spinos. Our regular host and producer is Becca Johnson-Spinos. For more information about this production and Outcry Theatre, you can find us on Facebook or at our website, outcrytheatre.com. If you enjoyed this podcast, please share it with your theater-loving friends and leave us a rating and a review in your podcast app.